Like and subscribe and click the bell icon to get new video updates.
Don't treat voters like fools when it comes to political appointments by Bevan Shields, June 24, 2022, 7:45 p.m. Save login, register or subscribe to save articles for later. Share normal text size, larger text size, very large text size. This week's furore over John Barilaro's $500,000 a year trade role in New York has stoked memories from my previous role as the Canberra bureau chief for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. During my 5 years in the press gallery at Parliament House, my inbox would occasionally ping with a government press release announcing that a former politician had been appointed to a diplomatic role in some fabulous part of the world. The appointment of John Barilaro to the cushy position of NSW Trade and Investment Commissioner in New York is hard to justify. Credit Dominic Lorimer. The releases were usually sent out late on a Friday afternoon in the hope journalists would have gone home for the week, or not be able to scramble in time to cover the story for that evening's television news bulletin or the next day's paper. This cynical maneuver is known in our industry as taking out the trash, or the Friday news dump, and really irritated me because of the sheer lack of respect for the public's intelligence. The government knew jobs for mates were a bad look, and that's why they tried to bury the news about them. My default position back then was that most of these postings were not deserved, but my stint in London as Europe correspondent for the Herald and The Age in 2020 and 2021 gave me a fresh perspective on political appointments. As we wrote in an editorial published on Friday, sometimes political postings are warranted. It makes sense for positions in key countries, such as the United States and United Kingdom, to be filled by people with political experience, a direct line to the Prime Minister, and a willingness to push boundaries. During my time in London, I saw how the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade worked abroad, and it often wasn't pretty. Bureaucrats serving as ambassadors were not willing to take risks, did not know how to properly work their host country's political landscape, and too often told their bosses back in Canberra what they thought they would want to hear. In London, I spent a fair bit of time observing and reporting on how George Brandis, the former Attorney General under Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull, performed as Australia's High Commissioner to the UK, and I thought he was a prime example of how some politicians can be great diplomats. His political nous was instrumental in stitching up a deal for the UK to give Australia 4 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine last year when the country desperately needed extra supply. He also drew on his political experience to sell a free trade agreement between London and Canberra to sceptical Tories representing farming constituencies. Brandis recently told my colleague Latika Burke that much of his success in London rested on his ability to communicate with former cabinet colleagues in Australia and new friends in Westminster. Former Labour leader Kim Beazley was also an excellent ambassador to Washington. Former South Australian Premier Mike Rann is still regarded as an effective representative in London and later, Italy, and former Liberal Treasurer Joe Hockey did a good job navigating the perils of the Trump administration during his time as ambassador in Washington, D.C. However, as the Herald wrote on Friday, the NSW government's decision to appoint Barilaro, the former NSW Deputy Premier and Nationals leader, to the cushy position of NSW Trade and Investment Commissioner in New York, is much harder to justify. Opposition leader Chris Minns has called the Barilaro appointment a farce. Based on reader feedback and interest in this issue, many of you seem to agree. As Minns said this week, the public is being asked to believe that in a global search, the best candidate for the Big Apple just happened to be a person who sat around the coalition cabinet table for several years. We also see no evidence that the 6 global trade commissioner jobs created by Barilaro and the NSW government in 2019 even represent value for money for taxpayers or guarantee a reasonable return on investment. To put their $500,000 salaries in context, Premier Dominic Perrottet is paid about $407,980 once an expense allowance is included. The Herald has campaigned for many years now on integrity in politics, the need for a federal anti-corruption body, and an end to blatant pork barreling. We have been exploring Barilaro's appointment this week and there are many unanswered questions about how it all transpired. We will stay on this story. A parliamentary inquiry into the saga will begin soon, and the Premier has also asked Michael Coutts-Trotter, the head of Department of Premier and Cabinet, to investigate and produce a report, which will be made public. As